Hello, guys, and welcome to another edition of Azure Study Series. Today, our Honorable Sir David has stuff for us.
Honorable.
Yeah, yeah,
Honorable reminds me of
yeah.
some of our African
Nigeria. Yeah, I
politicians.
know. Tell me why.
Honorable,
Yeah.
honorable days. While people throw chairs at one
So
another.
make sure you're not. I know you don't
But
want
I
to
don't
use.
I don't have the belly of an honorable. That's the thing, Sakofi.
Yeah,
Because if you're an honorable, we have to see that honor. Right? So I need to have like the belly of an honorable person to be called
your,
honorable.
your your physical appearance have to show it that okay, look, this guy is definitely honorable. Look at the belly, look at the back of his neck. Hold it.
Oh God.
That
When
means you're
people see
eating
you.
good.
Exactly. Monsieur, Monsieur, everything is all good.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
So,
true.
Sir David, what do you have in store for us today?
So today we're just gonna do like a conclusion of what we started yesterday, which is talking about network traffic management. So do a conclusion of that, and then we're going to go to talk about Azure Storage. So the main topic today is on Azure Storage.
Okay.
So and what I've also done, which I'll share my screen in a minute. What I've also done is because this particular course that we're doing, the AZ400, and we're going through the exam objectives, the objective is something that's actually constantly updated by Microsoft. So I was looking at that just early today, and if you go to Microsoft website on the AZ104 exam, what you notice is that the content of the exam will be updated in just a few days from now,
Wow.
right? So they're constantly updating it. So they do that for all the exams going forward now. So, but what I'm actually going to be doing is that when I talk about Azure Storage, I'll be focusing on exactly like the content that's updated going
In
forward,
the new
right?
one.
So
Okay.
that's what we'll be focusing on. So I've gone through that and the content around Azure Storage. So that's what we're going to try to focus. So you can see that the exam guide below shows the changes that will be implemented on 25th of May. So I've gone through that, and what we're going to be covering today will be aligned with the objectives that will be coming into place in just a few days.
Got it. All right.
Yeah, so that's fun. So, Kofi, how about you? How's your day been, man? How's it going?
Yeah, I can't complain. It's very sunny outside, and I didn't get a chance to go outside working all day. But
Yeah.
I mean, thanks to God, everything seems to be going on well.
Yeah. The
So
thing that you still
I
said
was,
is still funny to me. Yeah, sorry, carry on.
yeah, I was looking forward to this event. By the way,
The thing that you say is still funny to me, like on the honorable one,
yeah,
that's different level, right?
that's what I'm trying to make you understand.
No, that's not. I'm not on the honorable
On
level.
different level. Yeah.
Honorable level is another thing. So
Uh,
let's start. Let's start with the topic for today and stuff. But if I'm honorable, Sakofi, I won't be doing Azure. Right? If I'm honorable, what am I bothering myself with Azure? I would just go sit somewhere, make the money, not do anything. Just sit down and make some statements that don't make any sense. Well, sorry. Okay, virtual networking before I say the one thing. Okay, so yesterday we are talking about network traffic management, and we stopped at a service called Traffic Manager. So we're going to pick it up from there. So we said Traffic Manager is a service in Azure that we can use to do global level load balancing. Right. So we mentioned that some of the other ones are limited to regions or to availability zones within the region. But Traffic Manager is different in the sense that we can use it to distribute load across multiple regions in Azure. And here's the good thing, Kofi, is that Traffic Manager is not just limited to Azure. So it's not just limited to services that I have hosted in Azure. If I have services on premises, I have my on premises data center over here. I can actually use Traffic Manager to deliver traffic to that also. So that works on premises or in the cloud. And we saw yesterday that the way it works is we create the traffic manager resource. After we create the traffic manager resource, we configure our endpoint. After we configure our endpoint, then the entry point to our application will be Traffic Manager's DNS address, right?
Yeah.
The DNS address of Traffic Manager. And Traffic Manager, we mentioned yesterday that it's not an inline load balancer. In other words, it's not as if all the traffic comes through it and then it distributes it. No. What it does is it's going to give you, it's sort of like, how do I put it? Like someone that's directing people to different lines on the queue, right?
That's
Like,
true.
you go to
That's
the airport
right.
and you may have someone at the airport, even though like the airport that stack office level is different. You go to the airport, it's not like, you get those lines that you get like the rest of the people. If you're first class, you don't stay on the same line, right? The first class usually just walk up to the front. There's no queue. And then the rest of us were like all long around the queue and stuff. So it's sort of like traffic manager that directs people and says, okay, you're going over there. So you over there to that queue, over there to that queue. So that's what traffic manager does. So it does not actually stay in line. So traffic manager will pick one of these endpoints based on the configuration that we've put in. And then it's going to return that to the client and say, go talk to region A. And then the client goes to talk to region A. So let me go to create a traffic manager profile so that we see how that works. So right now, what I have, Sarkofi, is if I go on the app services, I have
Yeah.
two app services in Azure. So if I go to over here, I have UK South web app. Let me increase that a bit. So I have a web application running in UK South, and I have another one running in West Europe, right? So what I want to do is I want to use Traffic Manager to distribute load across to them. So I'll go to create a resource. I'll call this Traffic Manager, and I'll go create a Traffic Manager profile. So it's only going to take a few seconds to create. So the reason why it's a few seconds is like what we talked about yesterday, Sarkofi.
It's just
So
the configuration being pushed to it.
exactly. So it's not doing any, it's not creating anything in the back end. It's just adding configuration. But this is where we stopped yesterday, Sarkofi, because you see it says select a routing method that this
Yeah.
traffic manager would use. And you can see that there's currently 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 routing methods that are specified here. We're not going to go through all of them. We're just going to go through a few and then point you to the documentation for the others. However, we're going to go through like the most common ones. So yesterday I started with the one which is the wait, right? So the waiting, we started with priority. Sorry.
Priority. Yeah.
Yes, so we started with the priority traffic routing method, and we said priority is for an active passive scenario. Active passive. What do you mean by active passive scenario? Right? Because sometimes, Kofi, I'm not sure if you've experienced this in IT. I find out that a lot of people in IT like to use fancy terms, and without explaining those fancy terms. Have you ever had that happen to you before? It's happened to me a lot in the past, where I
Yeah.
go to ask somebody a question, and the answer that they gave me, I have 15 other. I'm like, so can you explain traffic manager to me? Yeah, it has this routing algorithm that uses to dynamically distribute traffic. I'm like, okay, I've got to go look up the definition of dynamic and algorithm and all this thing to figure out the answer. You might as well just have not said anything because now I'm more confused. So, so when we say active passive, it means that we have multiple instances, but only one of them will be receiving traffic at a time. The other one is just sitting down there, not receiving traffic at the moment. So that's what I mean by active passive. So that's the scenario for priority traffic routing. So here's how it works. So I go to create my traffic manager profile like I'm doing now. I specify the priority traffic routing method, and I'm going to add my endpoint. So they call them endpoint, which is the backend instances that the traffic would be directed to.
Yeah.
And then what I'm going to need to do is, because I'm using the priority traffic routing method, I'll need to specify priority for each of the backend instances. For example, I can say region A, you have priority 1, region B, priority 2, region C, priority 3. And Traffic Manager will keep that record. And it's also going to maintain and check the health of all those different instances. Now, the way that this is going to work is that every traffic will be directed all the time to region A because it's priority 1.
That's right.
Traffic would only go to region B, which is priority 2, if region A is not available. And traffic would only go to region C if region B is not available. So the highest priority always get 100% of the traffic if it is available. That's the way that works. So let me see. So now that we have this, so if a client comes in with a DNS query, traffic manager is going to always return region A's DNS. Client goes to talk to region A. If region A goes down, traffic manager will detect that and mark it as degraded. At which point, the next time a client comes with a DNS query, traffic manager will return the DNS of region B, except that goes down also. So let's go back to the portal and let's go complete this. So for this one, I'll go ahead and select performance and traffic routing method. I'll put that in my resource group. And I'll go ahead and create. So here's a trick question for you, Sakofi. It's a trick question. And I wonder if our audience also that's watching us live, if you can also chip in with the answer to this. So traffic manager is meant to be a global service, right? So it's going to be distributing traffic to multiple regions. However, I'm creating traffic manager and it says I'm putting it in a resource group location of UK South. Does that mean that if UK South is down, does that mean that my traffic manager is down?
No, it doesn't mean it's down.
It's an interesting.
The main thing probably will be the resource behind the traffic manager, and for the service itself, that is managed by Microsoft.
Yeah.
So I believe for that, more likely they'll have a contingency plan for that. If let's say you set up the traffic manager, I'm not sure, but probably it's either that it have its own sort of like redundancies, whereby if this fails, it will revert to this, or maybe they host it somewhere else which is not accessible to any of us, and then they manage it that way.
You're right, Sakofi, in the sense that if UK South is down, doesn't mean traffic manager would go down. Yeah. So I can see Vijay says, no, there must be paired region. The answer to that is actually based on this. So this is talking about the resource group location, not the location of the service. Yeah. The answer to that is understanding what a resource group is. A resource group in Azure does not store resources. Many think a resource group is a group of resources. No, resource group in Azure doesn't store resources. Resource group stores metadata of resources, not the resources. Right. So that is the reason why, Sakofi, I could, for example, let's bring up a quick paint, a quick whiteboard that we can use here. So that's the reason why, Sakofi, I could have a resource group and I could say, here's my resource group is in UK South. However, my resource itself is in West Europe. It's like, how does that work? How can my resource be in West Europe and it's in a resource group in UK South? The reason is because the resource is where the resource is. It just means that the configuration of this resource or metadata of this resource will be stored in UK South. So actually, if I go over to my Azure portal, you can see that. You can see that I've got, if I go to one of my resource groups, let's go to here. Let's go to resource group. Let's go to the one for this resource group, which is Network RG. You see that this resource group is located in, let's see, so it's located in UK South. Yeah. However, you see that it has resources in West Europe, right? So the resources in West Europe, or the resource groups over here. The resource, this just means that the metadata of the resources are stored over here, which is the configuration. What that means, Sakofi, just to make it very simple, is that if UK South were to go down, you won't be able to modify the configuration of this resource, but the resource itself will be available.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what that means. So if I go ahead and click create on that, so it's going to create my resource for me. And I can see, whoa, people are not taking it easy, Sakofi. We got like about 4 or 5 questions flying around already.
Let me bring out some of the questions. Yeah. All right. So for this question, must the app service traffic manager will manage traffic for? Okay, I'm just confused with this one.
I guess the question is saying, must the resource be in the same location as the resource group of traffic manager? No. So because here's the thing, Vijay, is that remember. Sorry, Michael. Michael is the one that asked the question. Because Michael, here's the thing is that again, if traffic manager is meant to be a global resource to distribute traffic across multiple regions, right? So it can be limited to say, oh, but you must be in the same resource group, right? The resource must be in the same location as the resource group. So it does not matter. So that doesn't matter.
All right.
So it's the answer to
Okay,
that.
so we got one here. This is about the priority. So, is it possible to define the same
Good.
priority?
Good question. So let's go to do that. So let's see. So right now I have my traffic manager profile and I'm going to add my endpoint. So I'm going to specify my endpoint is an Azure endpoint. So not an external endpoint is if I have resource in my own data center, right? Nested endpoint is if I'm going to another traffic manager. Talk about that later. But if I go to Azure endpoint, I'll call this my UK South web app and my resource is an Azure App Service, and I'm going to specify that to UK South Web App. So if I go ahead and specify that, and I had that.
So that target resource type is where you choose where your resource is. So if it's on-prem, that's where you have to select it from.
Oh, so if it's on-prem, what I'll need to do is type here is what I'll need to change to external.
External.
In which case, I just put in the FQDN or the IP.
Got it. All right.
Yeah. So if it's on-prem data center, but if it's in Azure, I can select Azure. In this case, my West Europe web app is the next one I want to add. It's an Azure App Service, and I'll go to select my West Europe web app, and I'll go ahead and click Add, and that's going to add that. So to start this question, what if priority number is defined as the same? So you can see that it's currently checking the endpoint. Let's go over to configuration. And let's go see that. So at the moment I've selected performance. So let's change that to priority. And let's save that. So performance was what I selected. Let's change that to priority. And okay, it saved that priority and stuff. So if I go back to my endpoint, and you can see you cannot have them. You cannot have them with the same priority number, Satish. It won't allow you to do that, right? So okay, yeah. So okay, that one is currently showing as 1. So let's go to try to do that, and let's see what Traffic Manager will do. So it's checking the other one. If I go over here and I try to switch that and say you're also going to be 1, it's like no. They cannot have the same priority value. 1 has to be 1 because again, this active passive that we're talking about, right? So 1 has to be 1. So that's the answer to that question. Any other question? Wow, there's so many questions today.
Yeah.
Come on.
Fine, yeah. All right, so let's bring this up.
Yeah.
I said, can I move an existing resource into a resource group and how?
It depends. So, David, so that's a question for another time. Yes, you can move resources, but it depends. Not all resources can be moved. Some resources can be moved, some resources cannot be moved. Actually, an example of a resource that cannot be moved is Traffic Manager. And another example of a resource that cannot be moved is Express Route, as you can imagine. You have an Express Route gateway. So there are certain resources that can be moved. There are some that cannot be moved. There are some that can be moved across subscriptions. There are some that can be moved across regions. So it varies, but that's a question for another day, David.
All right.
Yeah.
So this question is about our streaming. I believe, I think we're already streaming in 1080p, I guess.
I think it's 720 that we are currently doing.
720, all
Yeah,
right.
it's a sad thing. I think Restream only allows us to go up to 720 for some reason. Okay. Anyways, so we've got this already, Sakofi. If I go to overview and if I go to the DNS and I copy that, you see that I should be able to get to my web application. So there you go. It's taking me to my web application. But the question is, which one did it take me to? So let's go verify that. So to verify that, I'm going to bring up command prompt. Let's bring up PowerShell. So PowerShell. Here we go. Sir Kofi, you're like a master of PowerShell. So let's look up. Because I know that you've been using PowerShell for everything. You use PowerShell for, for a lot of the things that you do at
at the
work.
moment, because they have integrated most of these Linux commands in PowerShell, that's why I use it. But majorly, I just run Linux commands here because it now works in PowerShell. That's about it. But I'm continuously, I keep learning a lot of these commands, which are really good.
Yeah, they're very, very good. Yeah, it's nice. So if you have a look at this one, so you see that it's currently, you can see if I do an NS lookup for traffic manager DNS, you can
Yeah.
see that it's sending me to UK South DNS. It
All
automatically
right.
sends me to
Got it.
that. So what I'm going to do is at the moment that means I'm currently going directly to UK South. So if I go to my Azure portal and I go to under app service, and then I'm going to go shut down the UK South one, I'm just going to go stop it. So it's going to fail the health check. So let's go to UK South. Let's go ahead and stop that completely. So let's go over here, and then I'm gonna just stop it, and then give it a while. So again, it depends on what I've configured for DNS. So when I created my app traffic manager profile, I can go under configuration to make it even quicker. So I can set the DNS time to live to be shorter. So maybe make it like 10. Save that. So the failover will be much more quicker. I can set how often it's going to do the probe. So, every 10 seconds and stuff to make it even more quicker. But it could take a while, but eventually it's going to detect that is down. So if I close that and I go over to that, see that. So let's go ahead and clear DNS IP config /flush DNS. So, Kofi, how old were you when you started using the computer? Were you
Well, I started using computer I think probably around the age of 14. That's when I started using.
Whoa, I didn't even know what a computer was. I was rolling tires on the streets.
That's when I started. I mean,
Wow.
that's what made me more like get an interest in knowing how things works in computer because
Yeah.
uh, I learned it literally by myself. It wasn't like I had to a teacher to teach me.
Wow.
We had a computer at home, and gradually, I
Wow.
just started saying, "What does the mouse do with the keyboard?" And then, yeah, I was very interested in games, and I was playing games in
Which
DOS.
which
So
game
you
did
can
you play? Which
imagine.
ones? Which
I
ones did
can't
you play?
remember the name. That you
Did
have
you
to
play
really
Karateka? Karateka?
can't remember.
The
That,
karate guy that's like very difficult game like that. Did you play that
uh,
one? Oh,
no, I
okay.
didn't. Yeah.
So yeah, yeah. Well, I was like really old when I started using computer. So
All
here
right.
you go, sarcophagus. You can see that it's now directing me to West Europe.
Right. So
So
considering this, right, the
yeah,
resource is now being pulled from West Europe, and
yeah,
previously the priority was on the South UK, and the resource being pulled from there. So
yeah.
essentially, you can host different resources at different locations, and then once you point the, if let's say you update your content and you put it on different web app in different locations, you can point it to it. Does it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're going to cover the scenario that you're talking about when we get to the Azure DevOps exam objectives. Because what you do is you have your pipeline deploy your service into multiple regions at once.
Yeah.
So that's way it's not even like something that you're doing manually. Your pipeline, when you're configuring your deployment, when it's gone to your continuous integration, is going to automate deployment into multiple regions, and then traffic manager is the one that's now arranging how traffic flows to each.
Right.
Yeah. Awesome. So now that we understand that, let's just talk about a few other routing methods, and then we go to talk about Azure Storage. So a few other routing methods. So that's priority. Let's just talk about a few other ones. So if I go over here to weighted, so the weighted one, this is one is a bit because what this one is doing is I have my traffic manager profile, I configure the endpoint, and then I specify weight for the endpoint. Now you're like, what's this weight? The weight is going to be used as a relative distribution mechanism. Okay, David, that's a lot of English. What does that mean? So let's see what does that mean. So, for example, let's say this is what I've configured. I've specified region A is going to have a weight of 50. Region B is going to have a weight of 5. Region C is going to have a weight of 45. So I deliberately make this 100, but I don't need to make it 100. Right? I can essentially make it any random number I want. But what this means, Sarkofi, is that for every one request that is sent to region B, 10 requests will be sent to region A, and 9 requests will be sent to region C. So it's going to, traffic manager will do like a relative calculation between that weight and say, based on this weight calculation, for every one request that goes there, 5 has to go there and 4 has to go there.
Okay, so this is more for load balancing. Balancing, it doesn't put pressure on one specific node.
Yes, but then it also allows you to specify which load can handle more.
Oh,
Sorry, which instance can handle more. So for example, if I know that region A can probably handle more, I can say, use region A, give it a higher weight than the other ones, which means it's going to receive more requests than the other ones. So that's what that is about. So essentially, load traffic can go to any one of them, like what Sarkofi said. So DNS query comes in, traffic manager can essentially return the DNS of any one of them, but it's going to distribute it based on the weights that you've specified. So that's what that is about.
all
And
right.
that's the weighted option. Then we have the performance option, which is very popular. Now, the performance one does something a bit intelligent, right? So, what performance option does, Kofi, is that again, we create our traffic manager profile like I did, we had the endpoint like I did. But what traffic manager would do is that traffic manager is going to monitor the performance of my different instances from different locations around the world.
So what sort of metrics is it going to use for the measurement?
It's just going to do HTTP requests from
All
different
right.
locations around the world to my different instances, and then it's going to record the performance that it got back. So,
Okay.
for example, traffic manager is doing, it's doing tests from that IP address range, and it's recording and saying when I tested this, West US responded to me in 15 milliseconds, North Europe responded to me in 75 milliseconds, East Asia responded to me in 150 milliseconds. So now you have a user coming from an IP address of 89.17.1.1. Traffic manager then compares that and say the last time I did a test from a location close to where you're coming from, West US responded quickest. Therefore, I'm sending you to West US. So Sarkofi, went to visit his gold farm in Ghana. He's like, let me check my Bitcoin investment, and you're checking that on your phone. So, when you go to the URL, it's going to say, okay, Sarkofi, the last time I did a test close to the region where there's a lot of gold, I know I know the ones that responded quicker. Therefore, I'm going to send you to that region. So that's how the performance option. That's how that works. So it's much more intelligent. So you can see why it's popular because this one allows for more fluidity. So
Yeah.
because what you can because we may be tempted to think, oh, okay, if I'm coming from United States, I should be sent to West US because I'm closer to that. But that's not always the case. What happens if the West US instance, maybe the CPU usage is like 99%, so it's really struggling.
Yeah.
Whereas the one in North Europe is like, I just have 2% CPU usage. I have a bunch of capacity, to handle requests. So when Traffic Manager does its test, it should be able to pick that up and says, this one was struggling really hard. So it responded to me after like about 90 milliseconds, whereas North Europe responded to me in 60 milliseconds. So even though a user is coming from US, Traffic Manager can detect that that one seems to be struggling based on the last time it did a test and sends the user to North Europe.
Okay, that's really good.
Yeah.
But is it possible to combine multiple? For example, can you combine performance and parity?
That's a very good question, Sarkofi. So when I was creating the traffic manager earlier, you see that it gave me, sorry, if I go over here, when I was specifying my endpoint, sorry. So when I was adding my endpoint, it said, okay, I can add an endpoint for Azure endpoint, which is services in Azure. I can add an external endpoint, but it now
Yeah.
says one. It says I can add
Okay.
a nested endpoint.
All right.
So what nested means, Kofi, is that I can have multiple traffic manager nested with each other. So for example, to your point, so I can have traffic manager one over here. Okay? So that's traffic manager one. And then I can have other traffic managers over here as the endpoint, which are using different algorithm.
All right.
So I'll show you an example of how that would work. So before I do that, let me just show you one more. So let's go to the geographic one and then I'll stop for now. So this one we already understand performance. So geographic is much straightforward. It's where I'm saying based on the location of the user, send the user to this.
Yeah.
So this one is where I'm saying if a user is coming from Germany or coming from UK, send them to region A. They're coming from US or Canada, send them to region B. They're coming from Japan or Korea, send them to region C. They're coming from South Africa or the gold country that Sarkozy comes from, send them to send them to region D. So essentially, you can specify you can specify based on geography. So a good way to do that, Sarkozy, would then be maybe I have this one over here at the top that's using geography option. So I'm using it to say if a user is coming from this location, send them to this other traffic manager, right? So maybe this one sends them to this other traffic manager where this one is now using maybe performance, right? To
Yeah.
say maybe I have multiple instances in UK South. So let's draw this down and let's move this down. So maybe I have like multiple instances of my application over here. So I can use the first one to say send any user that's coming from United States, send them into the this traffic manager. And then once they get here, then I'll now use performance to send them to the instance in United States that's performing the best. So I
All
can
right.
nest them with one another. Awesome. So that's it for Traffic Manager. Hopefully that makes sense to us. So for your exam, just make sure you understand the different the different routing methods that it supports. So make sure you understand that for your exam, and that will do you well. So now we're going to quickly go talk about Azure Storage. Now with Azure Storage, I'm going to try to structure what we're going to talk about. So here's what we're going to start with. We're going to start by introducing Azure Storage. And you will learn something very useful here. So we're going to introduce Azure Storage, and then when we excuse me, when we finish from that, we're going to look at the exam objective, the updated one that I showed to you. So we're going to look at Azure Blob network connection options because that was called out in the exam objective options. And then after that, we're going to look at Azure Blob authentication options. And then after that, we're going to look at moving data into Azure Blob. So these are the three main areas that we're going to focus on. So, but these are all part of like the exam objective. There's some objectives around Azure files also, but it's very few. But I'm not sure I will be able to get to that. But the good thing is Sakofi has an amazing lab that covered
That's right.
the
Yeah.
scenario that's covered by the objectives. So let's start first by introducing Azure Storage. So here's how I like to start with when I talk about Azure Storage Sakofi. Let's take it back a little bit to see what are we talking about? What are we trying to achieve here? So the first thing to try to understand is our applications that we're creating. So developers are creating these applications. Applications interact with data. When was the last time you saw an application that doesn't interact with data, Sakofi?
Well, nowadays every application does.
Yeah, every application interacts with data. But there are different types of data sets that applications interact with. So application data can be classified in one of three ways. So we have unstructured data, structured data, and semi-structured data. Those are the three main types of data sets that applications interact with. But what does this mean in terms of all these different data sets? Let's start with unstructured data. Unstructured data is data that does not adhere to a particular model. What does that mean, David? Data that does not adhere to a particular model. What that means is data that doesn't have like a strict schema. It's like anything. So we're talking about like your files, your text files, your log files, your media files, like your video files, your audio files, and your CSS style sheet for your website. Any type of data, any type of object, anything that's a file. It could be a VHD, it could be anything. That's unstructured data. So if you're building a web application, you have your images, your videos, all those are unstructured data. Then you have your structured data. Structured data are those that have a strict schema that they adhere to. Any example of this that you can think of, Sakofi, of structured data?
Structured one.
Yeah.
Let me see.
Give you a tip over here.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Database.
SQL. Yeah, a SQL databases, right? So that could be Microsoft SQL, MySQL, PostgreSQL, Oracle database. You have all this because what happens with structured data is it puts a lot of focus on consistency. That's the focus, right? The focus here is how we can be as consistent as possible, right? So it defines a strict schema to say, okay, you're going to have this table, and this table is going to have this row, and this row can only accept an integer, and this row can only accept, a string, and it's going to tightly control the everything. So it doesn't allow for flexibility. So in these days of the cloud, Sakofi, of cloud native application, where Sakofi has like an amazing gold company. There's another young gold rich guy that I hear that's coming up. His name is Akwasi. So Akwasi is coming up with his own. That's Akofi's son, by the way, for those that don't know. So Akofi's son is so Akwasi is coming up. He's like, nah, but God, I'm gonna how to do that in this stuff. Got to come up with like this bigger gold business, right? Maybe combine gold and Bitcoin together and stuff. So he's coming up with all those ideas. So Akwasi is like, you know what? Why that business is still using all this structure schema and everything, and it's not able to move fast. I noticed that customer require this type of thing. So Akwasi can quickly create an application, and then its database is more flexible. So it doesn't need to fit into a particular schema. If customers come tomorrow and they demand something else, its database schema can easily adapt to that. So that's the downside of structured data. It's great for consistency, but not good for flexibility. So the other type of...
Before we go ahead, let me bring up this question. It's about the traffic manager.
Yes.
So can Azure VM be part of a traffic manager?
Yes. So traffic manager can distribute loads to app services, virtual machines, public IP address, anything like that. Yeah. So it can be. Then we have semi-structured data set. So semi-structured data set that's less organized than structured data, right? So for example, like take like an e-learning platform, for example. So I said e-learning, like an e-commerce business, for example, Sakofi, like Amazon, for example. When you look at the products in Amazon, the products are different, right? So in this case, you have like a book, and the book, you have the properties of product, author, electronic, and then you have another item, which is a laptop. The laptop doesn't have an author. If you have like a strict database schema, you know how difficult that would be for an e-commerce website like Amazon, right? Where different items have different properties to create tables and all of that. So this adds more flexibility, right? They don't need to match each other. This one can this one can collect a completely different set of data, while this one is collecting a completely different set of data, right? And they don't need to match. Right. So normally when we're doing this type of stuff on premises, so you may be thinking, David, where are we going with this? We're talking about Azure Storage, right? We use different storage solution on premises to meet this kind of requirement, right? So we have unstructured data, we're using our network file shares, right? To store our object, our files. Structured data, we're using our SQL databases. And semi-structured, we're using MongoDB and Cassandra and all the others. The thing is that Azure has storage solutions to accommodate all of these classes. And that is the power of Azure Storage Account. Azure Storage Account is not a single service. Azure Storage Account is a platform service that has multiple services built on top of it to accommodate different types of data that an application interact with. So that's the power. So for example, Azure Storage has 4 main services that it provides. And again, they align to different types of data sets. So for example, it has the Blob service. The Blob service is a service that's used for unstructured data storage. So your objects, your files, that's what that's used for. You have your file service. So that's your network file share in the cloud. So that's something that you can use to store your object, your unstructured data storage, just using SMB protocol to access them. You have your table service, which is sort of like for semi-structured data sets. So this is sort of like your NoSQL database, a cheap NoSQL database in Azure Storage. So that's what Azure Table is. And then you have your queue service, which is for application messaging. So you have application components that are decoupled from one another. They need to communicate with each other. So that's where you want them to be able to communicate using messages. So those are the different services that exist under Azure Storage. So we have the Blob service, the file service, the table service, and the queue service. So let's quickly just have a look at some of these points that we talked about over here. So point number 1 is let's look at the connection options for Azure Blob in particular. So let's start with Azure Blob first, and let's look at some of the connection options that it supports. So to do that, I'll go to the Azure portal and I'll go create a quick storage account for myself. So let's go to here. Storage account. So Sakofi, did you ever use the floppy disk then? Did you use the floppy disk at all?
Yep. I used the floppy disk many times.
Was it
interesting though that you never assume that these things will go out of fashion, and all of a sudden it doesn't exist. Even CD-ROM Who cares about those?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
yeah.
That's true. Do you remember there was one? There was another one that was sort of competing with CD-ROM at the time. I forgotten what Blu-ray. There you go.
Blu-ray, yeah.
It's completely gone, right? It doesn't exist anymore. So I will come back to talk about all of this stuff that I'm doing. By the way, ladies and gentlemen. So, but for now, let's just create a storage account. Let's see some of the options that we want to talk about. Yeah, then what I used to do then is like, okay, all I had was diskette or disk, right? The floppy disk. So I didn't have a computer, but I used to download games, and then I used to go to the house of a friend that had a computer, maybe like 1 hour, a week or something to go play some game. So that's what I used to do then, and yeah, I remember when I first got like my first 1 gigabyte USB. Whoa, I was like a big. I thought I was a big man.
Yeah. Actually, the first computer I used, it did had about, I think about 1.4 gig hard disk. So,
Whoa, that's
and
that's
it
rich
was
man
really
stuff,
good.
man.
And so now you can just think about it. It's just mobile devices even have what 120 gig of storage. So
You wonder where we're gonna be like in the next like 40 years. I
yeah,
know where Sarkov is gonna be. Gold farm will have multiplied, a lot of money flowing in. Okay, so here we go. I have my storage account. So let's talk about the networking options. So networking options to connect to the storage account. By default, a storage account is open on the network level to the entire internet. In other words, unrestricted network access. Now, unrestricted network access doesn't mean you can access the data because you still have to authenticate, but it just means from the network level, you can get to the service from the network level from any IP in the world. So that's the default. So it allows
okay,
access from all network. So when we're talking about the exam objectives, which is what we're working towards, when we're talking about blob connection options, you have what is called, the public endpoint, and endpoint, and I'll just put this as unrestricted. So public endpoint unrestricted. In other words, accept traffic from the internet unrestricted. But if I wanted to restrict that, I can go to switch that from allow access from all networks to allow access from selected networks. So this case, this storage account will not accept traffic from every IP on the internet. It's only going to accept traffic from the IP that I specify. So it's giving
okay.
me the option here to add my own public IP. Sorry, Mr. Kofi, you wanted to say
Yeah, I
something?
was just gonna say. So does it mean that okay? So the main reason that your storage account name have to be unique is because obviously they have to be able to access publicly. So does it mean that if you, let's say for your storage name is UK storage 8976, so if I do the storage name dot, let's say blob dot the other URL for Microsoft Windows, the blah blah blah, I'll be
Yeah.
able to get to this resource since it's publicly accessible.
Yes. So,
Oh,
but you won't be able to access the data. You probably get an error message that says the resource does not exist. But the reason
right.
for that is because you did not provide an authentication, right?
Correct.
So it's sort of like, so the way that it works, sort of, it's like, the way that RDP works. So let's go very quickly to put this together, Sakofi. So if I go over here, so let's go to see what I'm doing over here is I have a storage account. So I'm just going to go over here and I'm going to say I have my Azure subscription over here, Sekofi. And within my Azure subscription, I have a storage account within that. Now, anyone from the internet can connect from a network perspective. So, from a network perspective, you can connect. However, when you connect from a network perspective, the storage account and the different services under it will still ask you for like
Authentication.
authentication. So it's like, oh, you can get to something via RDP and then it prompts you and says username and password. But what that also means is that people can then begin to use different ways to try to bypass the authentication. It's not easy to bypass the authentication, right? So we'll talk about that later. I have a book that's coming, but we'll talk about that later when the book is actually out. So yeah, but anyway, so it won't allow. So it's not easy to bypass, but essentially the fact that it's available means that people can at least attempt to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
So by restricting it based on specific IP, that means no one can get to it except for your IP address.
Exactly. So that's what that's saying. So in other words, to Sarkovy's point, what we're trying to do here is if I put this as 20, so by default, it's unrestricted to any IP address, but I don't want unrestricted. So I want to replace where it's unrestricted. I want to replace that to say, only specified IP addresses. So now what I'm going to configure is I'm going to say only specified IP addresses would be able to access this. So, and I'll show that to you very quickly. So what I'll do here is, I have my storage account. I'll go ahead and add my client IP and say accept traffic from my client IP. So I'm going to add, that's my public IP address. And I'm going to go ahead and click save. So once it finished saving that, it's going to allow traffic. But yeah, it's going to allow traffic from my IP address. So, and I can go under containers. I have a container called data, so I can access it, from my IP address. However, if I go to a virtual machine that I have over here, so let's go to under my virtual machine. I'm going to connect to that virtual machine using Azure Bastion. So I've got Azure Bastion over here. I'm going to connect to it and I'm going to put in my password and I'm going to click on connect. So that's going to open that up. And if I try to connect to that storage account from this system, it's not going to work. So because it's not on the allowed list. So if I go over here and I do portal.azure.com and I authenticate with my username, DOAZ204B at outlook.com. Let's change that.
Oh,
Because
that.
using UGS keyboard.
Yes,
So
yeah.
let's go ahead and fix that. So put in my password. Old man Sir Coffee. That's the password. So it's asking for all this one. I'm just going to skip it. And I'm going to say no thanks. I don't need that for now. Okay. Here we go, Sir Coffee. Azure Portal doesn't support today. Microsoft, come on. So I'm going to go download Chrome. So apologies, ladies and gentlemen. So in the past, at least it used to give me the option to download like an application and stuff like that. But now it's just gone. And you see, like now you want me to download Edge.
You want you to download Edge, yeah.
I'm not going to download Edge. You messed up, Microsoft.
Edge seems to be quite cool now, though, because I've been using it for the past few days, and it seems to behave the same as what Chrome does.
Yeah, because they're using the Chromium engine. They're using the same engine that Chrome uses. So that's what Microsoft are using. Personally, I think get out of the well, you know what? I'll just be quiet and say get out of the browser business. Leave the browser business for people that. But it's like Kofi. Everyone is sort of like after data these days.
That's right.
One of the ways.
It's all about another way they can get information. Data.
Yeah, if you're missing out on that, browser data, that's a lot of data that you're missing if you're a big company, right? That the funny thing happened the other day, Sarkofi, myself and yourself were having a meeting. So while this is installing, apologies, ladies and gentlemen. So Sarkofi and myself were having a meeting on Zoom, and we were talking about an application. Now, I've never searched for that application ever in my life. Actually, Sarkofi introduced that application to me on that call. I've never searched for it. And guess what? After we finished the call, I went to Facebook, and what advert was I getting? Advert of the application that Sarkofi just mentioned to me. Right? I was like, what?
So there must be someone was listening.
Yeah, that's like, what's going on? Yeah. I've never ever heard of this application before, and it is asking me to buy it. It's like, whoa, slow down. So let's go over here. Okay, I'm putting in my password now, and there we go. So now I'm connecting with my credentials and everything, but I'm connecting from a different IP address than what one of the IP addresses that's allowed. So let me go to my storage account and see if I can access it. So that's UK storage. If I go to that storage account, and if I go under containers at Coffee, Let's see. Can you see?
Yeah.
It
So
says that. And the reason for that is because, hey, you're connecting from a network that's not allowed. Right. It says that's your client IP and it's not on the list of allowed IP addresses. So that's another option that we can use.
yeah, we got a
Yeah.
few questions. Let me bring them up and then we
Yes.
can
Yes,
talk
sir.
about this. All right. So when deploying application in multiple location for availability, does each deployment have a separate database, or do we direct all the deployment to a single database? So
Um,
the second question is, how is data synchronized?
if you're talking about high availability, then having a single database is not high availability.
Yeah,
Because if that single database goes down, then your availability is out the window. Uh, so what's the other question, Sakofi?
let me just bring this up. Right, if I'm using network appliance, sure as Sophos, do I still need this firewall configuration?
Oh, okay. No, yeah, for sure. This one is not. Remember, the service that we're talking about is not in a virtual network.
Yeah.
Azure Storage is not in a virtual network. So your virtual network is over there on one side. So this is a platform service sitting on the platform network. So this is not in your in your personal network. So yep, you need to do this for platform services. So
Let me
yeah,
bring up
sorry,
the last question here.
no problem, sir, no problems.
All right, so this is about practicing the lab session. So, is there any other way that they can get, subscription essentially? If you can pay for the
Free
subscription,
trial is the easiest way to get a subscription. So that's the
yeah.
option to use. The
But
other
with the free
option,
trial,
sorry,
you
sir.
get 1 month credit, right?
Yes, you do. But actually, you get like a free tier. So Microsoft are doing the similar thing that AWS are doing,
AWS, okay.
which is you get like a free tier to access certain applications. But it's very limited. So essentially, you can access some services for free for 12 months, but it's very very limited in terms of what you can do.
Yeah. So, yeah, do you have a link that we can share, or maybe tomorrow, next time we can probably share that link? You say it's quite similar to AWS option,
Oh,
whereby they give you 750 hours of or something like that.
yes, so that actually, if you just go for Azure Free tier, so yeah, Azure Free tier, you'll be able to get that. So just Google,
Okay.
if you Google Azure Free tier, you'll be able to see that. So here's the Q&A for that very quickly. So you can see that it says, so you can see like products that are part of the 12
Oh,
month free
12 months. Yeah,
availability.
that's really
So
good.
5,000 text records. So for virtual machines, it's usually very limited. So 750 hours of this size of virtual machine, and that's 750 hours of this one.
Okay.
So essentially, it's very limited stuff. Yeah, but that's for 12 months that you can get that. Okay,
Okay, so
so
here,
yeah, sorry, sir. You were saying something, Sakofi.
no. I was just emphasizing on the answer that's it right there. They can use the
Yes.
free tier. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've talked about this two already, unrestricted and specified IP addresses. So let's talk about this other two, service endpoint and private endpoint. What is this service endpoint thing? Let's say, Sir Kofi, I have a virtual machine in my Azure virtual network. And my virtual machine in my Azure virtual network, the application that I'm hosting on that needs to store data on this storage account, right? So that's the goal. I want my application that's running on this virtual machine in my private virtual network in Azure to store data on this storage account. By default, the traffic that's going to flow from my application to the storage account, by default, it's going to go over the internet. It's going to go out of my VM and it's going to go over the internet and it's going to try to connect back to the storage account. Now, that's not very efficient, right? Because they're both on Azure, but it's going over the internet to access this service. So that is where service endpoint can help us, Sir Kofi. So, because what service endpoint does, and we've talked about this in the past, is that service endpoint would essentially add a root entry to a root table to say any traffic that's going to Azure Storage, I want you to send that traffic over Microsoft private wide area network. So instead of going to the internet, send it over Microsoft wide area network, and that's going to be faster and that's going to be more efficient. So that's the point of service endpoint, is to provide more efficient routing. So that's that other option that we have. But the other advantage that we have is that once we implement this, we can also now go say we want to block traffic that's routed over the internet.
All
So
right.
now we have an advantage, because now we're like, if it's not coming over the Microsoft wide area network from our private resources to access the storage account, if it's coming over the internet, block it. So now we can essentially make this private, right? So now we can get a bit of like private option to that. So we've seen this in the past, but I'll just quickly show that to you. So let's go to my Azure storage account again that we created. So if I go to my Azure storage account, so actually the easiest way to configure this is I go to configure it from the network level. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the subnet where I have this virtual machine, West Europe VM01. So I'll go under virtual networks. I'll go under my West Europe virtual network. I'll go to select the subnet that I have this in. So if I go on the subnet and I have this web subnet, so that's where the application, that's where that virtual machine is. I'll click on that web subnet. And then I'm going to go under service endpoint. And you can see that I can add service endpoint for Azure Storage, which I already added, and for Cosmos DB and stuff. So I can add those, right? So I had those service endpoints there, and I go ahead and click save for that. So, and then once I've added that, then what I can then do is if I go under my storage account, I can then go use that service endpoint. So let's go. I hope my storage account. Yeah. So that's in West Europe. So that's good for me. Even though I called it UK, it's in West Europe. That's good. So when I go back under my firewall, under my networking section, Sakofi, so we're talking about Azure Storage network options. If I go under the networking option over here, and then I can then go, I want to allow access from an existing virtual network. And then what I can then do is I can go to select my network. I can then go to select my subnet, which is that subnet that I've enabled service endpoint for. And then once I had that, and I go ahead and click on add, and I go ahead and click on save. Now, once that is saved successfully, what you notice, Sakofi, is I go back to this. Now, I wasn't able to access it a minute ago, right?
Yeah.
If I go ahead and refresh that, now you can see I can access it. The error message is now gone. So now I can access that. And the way that I'm accessing that is that because I've added this VNet and that subnet over the service endpoint, it's just going over Microsoft wide area network, and it's using that to connect to my storage account over here. Yeah. So, Sarkovi, unfortunately, I think that we're running out of time. I would love to talk about private endpoint and the others. So maybe what we're going to do, here's what we're going to do. Let me go look at the timetable that we have, because we need to talk about storage and conclude this. So let's look at the timetable that we have for next week, because this is our final study for this week until next week. But what do we have? So next week is meant to be start to talk about virtual machines. So what we'll do, Sarkofi, is that we'll adjust this a little bit. So next week we'll conclude storage, and then we'll move virtual machines to that. So we just move everything by a day. I think that's the only thing we'll need to move. So all the others will still be okay. Yeah. So I think that's what we'll do. So, but that's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. So Sarkofi, you have something for the people.
Yeah. So if you can bring up the slides and then we can go through that. So the video is still going on. Yeah. So it's now processing. So it should be ready within the next 5 minutes, essentially. So this is the lab. Most of the stuff said David talked about, you'll be able to go through in this lab. So for lab one, like always, it's all about provisioning the environment to set a app so that we can actually go through the rest of the lab. Right, so for the lab 2, you create and configure the Azure Storage account, just like Sir David did, and you'll be able to create the container, and then you'll be able to put a file into the container. So that will be task 3. So for task 4, you manage the authentication and authorization, just like said demo to us just a minute ago, and then you can try the connectivity, try to see if you can access the resource when you allow it for your own private IP address and for a device which is not allowed in there, essentially. All right. So for task 6, yeah, so for task 6 is managing network access for Azure Storage. So you'll be able to go through that and perform a test as well. So you use your own VM, just like say David demo to us, and then you can make that connection. Okay, so this is what we have for you. The video is still, let me double check again. Yeah, it's almost done, 99% process. So it should be there within the next 5 minutes. So
I
do
think there's
well
like someone
to,
has a question, or let's
yeah,
just
let
take
me,
one last question
oh
for.
yeah. So I think Michael said we did not fully read the question that he put on here. So I said, please, is there a way for someone that can't pay for subscription to have an Azure account for practice aside the usual trial account? The Azure trial period isn't even mentioned enough to practice.
So yeah, so unfortunately, is the Azure trial. You can always create like different email addresses to spin up
Yeah,
different trials
that's what I
once
was
it
thinking as
finishes.
well.
Yeah. So,
Or
but
what about if you
unfortunately,
use one of those 10 emails? I mean, these services whereby it will generate a temporary email address for you. Can you
I'm
use
not
those
sure.
for
I've
that?
not tested it before.
Okay.
So I'm not sure. So maybe that's another thing to try, like what Coffee described. Yeah. But unfortunately, the free trial is what you. The other option you have is to attend some Microsoft event, and then you can get some Azure Pass vouchers in some cases. But that's the only option, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much. I'll see you next week. But for now, I'm gonna keep trying to work hard, be like Sir Kofi, make money, make bank, get get that dough.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
And we will see you guys next week.
See you next
Have a
week.
have a good week.
Yeah.
Bye
Cheers. See
bye.
you.